The galaxy was vast, filled with countless civilizations, star empires, and councils that decided the fate of many worlds. Yet, within that endless sea of stars, there were places no one cared for. Small, quiet planets with no wealth, no armies, and no voice in galactic matters. Seralith was one of them. Seralith was a beautiful world. Its skies were soft shades of gold during sunset, its forests shone with silver-leaved trees, and its oceans sparkled under 3 pale moons. But beauty meant nothing in the galaxy. To the larger civilizations, Seralith was simply a worthless piece of rock, too poor in resources to mine, too peaceful to fear, and too far away to control. The people of Seralith, the Cerealans, were gentle. By nature, they were not warriors, nor did they seek expansion beyond their planet. They lived in harmony with the land, building villages along rivers and trading simple goods like fabrics, pottery, and herbal medicines. They believed in peace, but in the galaxy, peace without power was weakness. For decades, raiders descended upon their villages. Pirates stole crops, destroyed homes, and carried away those who resisted. The Cerealans sent messages for help, pleas to the great councils of the galaxy, begging for protection. No answer ever came. To the powerful civilizations, the Cerealans did not matter. That changed the day the humans arrived. The ship Dauntless was not a mighty battleship. It was an exploratory vessel, sent to chart the edges of unknown sectors. Its captain, Elias Morgan, was a man known for curiosity more than conquest. His crew was a small group of explorers, engineers, and scientists. They were not looking for war. They were searching for knowledge. When the Dauntless first entered Seralith's orbit, the crew saw a planet that seemed untouched by modern industry. Captain Morgan expected only to make contact, exchange greetings, and move on. But as the ship's sensors scanned the surface, they detected fires burning in the villages, energy signatures from raider craft, and desperate distress calls. Morgan ordered a closer approach. Through the view screen, the crew watched as a Cerealan village was attacked. Small, unarmed crafts swooped down, firing at defenseless homes. Families ran in panic, their voices filled with fear. "This is not a battlefield," Morgan said, his voice heavy with anger. "This is slaughter." The officers of the Dauntless looked at him. They all knew the rules. Non-interference with minor civilizations was standard protocol. Interfering could cause diplomatic problems with powerful alien empires. But the captain's eyes were steady, and in that silence every member of the crew felt the weight of his choice. "Prepare the shuttle," Morgan ordered. "We're not leaving them like this." The shuttle descended through Seralith's golden skies, landing just outside the burning village. The Cerealans, wide-eyed and terrified, had never seen humans before. Tall figures in protective suits rushed to their aid, carrying medical packs, tools, and shields. The pirates, surprised by the sudden resistance, scattered after a brief exchange. When the fires were put out and the attackers fled, the villagers gathered around the strangers. Their leader, an elder named Saren, stepped forward. His face was lined with years of sorrow, yet his voice was steady. "Why?" he asked the humans. "Why would you risk yourselves for us? No one has ever come." Morgan removed his helmet, letting the villagers see his human face. He was tired, but his expression carried warmth. "Because it was the right thing to do," he answered simply. For the Cerealans, those words carried more power than any weapon. The crew of the Dauntless stayed in the village for days, repairing homes and treating the injured. The Cerealans were gentle and curious, offering food and hospitality in return for protection. Slowly, trust grew. Children followed the human engineers as they rebuilt water systems. Farmers showed the crew the herbal plants that grew only in Seralith's soil. The bond formed not from politics or treaties, but from shared humanity, or what the Cerealans would later call the spirit of guardianship. Still, shadows loomed. In the following weeks, rumors spread across nearby sectors. The galaxy took notice, not of the Cerealans, but of the humans. Other civilizations mocked them. "Humans waste their time," said one ambassador in the council. They protect a people with nothing to offer. It is weakness disguised as kindness. Yet on Sarilith the truth felt different. One night, as the 3 moons shone over the rebuilt village, Elder Saren sat with Captain Morgan by a quiet fire. The elder's voice was soft, filled with gratitude. "Do you know, Captain, what it means to us that you stayed? For generations we have cried for help and no one answered. We thought ourselves invisible. But now, we are seen." Morgan listened, gazing at the flickering flames. He thought of the orders he had ignored, the dangers they might face from larger powers and the uncertainty of the future. Yet he also thought of the Cerilan children laughing in the repaired streets and the villagers no longer living in fear. "Then maybe," Morgan said, "that is worth more than the approval of any council." From that moment, the decision was made. The humans would not leave. Sarilith, once forgotten by all, now had protectors. And though the galaxy would scoff, mock, and perhaps even threaten, the humans had chosen their path. It was a choice that would echo far beyond one small village. For the first time in their history, the Cerilans were no longer alone. The days after the humans' arrival on Sarilith were unlike anything the villagers had ever known. For the first time in years, the Cerilans woke without fear of sudden raids. Children laughed again as they played near the riverbanks. Farmers planted seeds with hope that the harvest might not be stolen. The presence of the Dauntless and its human crew gave the Cerilans something they had never possessed before: security. But peace never lasted long in the galaxy, especially for those considered weak. The pirates who had fled after the first encounter had not disappeared. They spread the word among their kind that humans were protecting the Cerilans. At first, the other raiders laughed. Why would anyone bother defending a world that offered nothing? But soon, mockery turned into greed. If humans wanted to play the role of guardians, then pirates would test just how far they were willing to go. On the Dauntless, Captain Elias Morgan stood in the command room, staring at the flickering map of the sector. His officers reported unusual movements from raider fleets gathering nearby. "They are coming back," said Lieutenant Harris, a young navigator with sharp eyes. "Not just a few ships this time, they're uniting." Morgan nodded grimly. "They'll try to crush us before we can set roots here. They want to make an example of Sarilith and of us." The crew knew their situation well. The Dauntless was not a warship. Its weapons were limited and its shields were not built for large battles. Against a full raider fleet, they stood little chance in open combat. But retreat was not in Morgan's thoughts. He looked at his officers. "We didn't come here to abandon them. If the raiders want a fight, then we'll give them one, but on our terms." The humans worked quickly, using every ounce of ingenuity they possessed. Engineers taught Cerilan villagers how to build simple barricades and warning systems. Scientists repurposed old exploration drones into flying decoys that could confuse enemy sensors. Even the Dauntless's survey equipment was adapted into makeshift weapons, devices that could blind pirate targeting systems or send false signals. The Cerilans were nervous. They had never fought before. They knew only farming, crafting, and peaceful living. But as they watched the humans labor tirelessly, refusing to give up, something changed inside them. Courage was not born overnight, yet the Cerilans began to believe that perhaps they were not as helpless as they once thought. In the evenings, the villagers would gather around the humans to learn. Children carried stones to strengthen the walls, while elders wove nets that could slow small raider craft. A young Cerilan named Lyra, barely more than a teenager, stepped forward one night. "Teach me how to stand," she asked Captain Morgan. "If you risk your lives for us, then we should not hide." Morgan studied her for a moment, then placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll teach you to stand, not as soldiers but as defenders of your home." The attack came sooner than expected. At dawn, the sky filled with dark shapes, pirate ships descending in formation. This time it was not a quick raid. Dozens of raider craft swarmed together, their engines roaring like thunder. Their leader, a scarred commander named Vesh, sent a broadcast across the open channel. "Humans," he sneered, his voice echoing through static. "Leave now, and we may spare your lives." Stay and you will be crushed with these weaklings. Morgan responded calmly, his voice firm. We don't abandon friends. If you want Sarilith, you'll have to go through us. Vesh laughed cruelly. So be it. The battle began. The Dauntless rose into the skies, its limited weapons blazing. Human pilots launched shuttles that dropped nets of energy to trap incoming raider fighters. Villagers set off smoke signals to hide their homes, while human engineers triggered false beacons that lured pirate ships away from real targets. The Cerilans, though untrained, stood beside their allies. They carried slings, spears, and tools defending the ground against raiders who tried to land. For the first time in their lives, they did not run. Fear burned in their hearts, but so did determination. In the skies above, the humans fought with skill and creativity. Where the pirates relied on numbers, the humans relied on clever tactics. They used the planet's terrain, flying through narrow canyons, leading raider craft into storms, and setting off traps hidden in the forests. Still, the battle was brutal. The Dauntless shook under heavy fire. Its shields flickered, warning, lights flashing across the control panels. Shields at 30%. Harris shouted. Hold steady, Morgan ordered, gripping the command chair. Make every shot count. On the ground, Cerilan villagers pushed back against raiders who tried to invade. Lyra, the brave young villager, stood at the front lines, with a group of children throwing stones from high ridges. To the raiders' surprise, their landing craft struggled to touch down without being swarmed. Hours passed, and the tide slowly turned. The pirates, expecting an easy conquest, found themselves trapped in a nightmare. Their ships were picked off one by one, their attacks met with resistance at every turn. The humans' clever tricks and the Cerilans' unexpected courage combined into something unstoppable. Finally, Captain Morgan gave the order. All remaining energy to forward cannons. Target Vesh's flagship. The Dauntless released a final, concentrated blast of fire. The pirate leader's ship erupted in flames, breaking apart as his fleet scattered in panic. Without their commander, the raiders retreated into the void, leaving Sarilith behind. When the smoke cleared, the villagers and humans stood together among the ruins. There were wounds to heal, fires to put out, and homes to rebuild. But for the first time in generations, Sarilith had not been taken. They had fought and won. Elder Saren, his eyes filled with emotion, stood before Captain Morgan. You have done what no one else has ever done. You stood with us not because of wealth, not because of power, but because of what is right. Morgan shook his head. No, we stood together. You defended your homes with courage. This was your victory, as much as ours. The villagers cheered, their voices echoing into the night sky. The bond between the Cerilans and the humans deepened, forged not only by kindness but by shared struggle. News of the battle spread quickly across the stars. Other civilizations heard that humans had defended a forgotten people against overwhelming odds. Some laughed, calling humanity reckless. Others grew uneasy, wondering what kind of species would fight so fiercely for a people with nothing to give. But for the Cerilans, none of that mattered. For the first time in history, they had protectors. For the first time, they had hope. And in the shadows of the galaxy, powers that once ignored them began to watch more closely, curious, threatened, and perhaps afraid. The first stand of Sarilith had changed everything. The smoke from the great battle slowly cleared, but the memory of it stayed with the Cerilans. For generations they had been victims, powerless before raiders. Now, for the first time, they had stood their ground and survived. Their courage had grown because of the humans. The Dauntless hovered above the villages, a silent guardian in orbit. Its crew worked side by side with the Cerilans to rebuild what had been lost. Houses were raised again with stronger walls. New tools were crafted and systems were put in place to warn of future attacks. But while the Cerilans celebrated their survival, the galaxy beyond their world reacted very differently. In the halls of the Great Council, whispers spread quickly. Ambassadors of mighty empires scoffed at humanity's actions. They waste their strength, said one ambassador, his voice filled with contempt. To defend a world that cannot repay them is foolish. What benefit can come from protecting the worthless? Others, however, were less amused and more alarmed. If humans can inspire even the weakest to resist, said a representative of a military empire, then they disrupt the balance. They must be reminded of their place. On Sarilith, life moved with quiet determination. Captain Elias Morgan knew well that enemies would come again, but he also knew this planet deserved a chance. His crew agreed. They had faced danger and loss, but none wished to leave. One evening, under the soft glow of the 3 moons, the villagers gathered in their central square. The Cerilan elder, Saren, stood before the people with Captain Morgan at his side. People, Saren said, his voice carrying across the crowd. We have lived in shadows for too long. The galaxy ignored our cries, but the humans answered. They fought with us not for gain, but for what is right. I ask you now, shall we walk this path with them, side by side? The Cerilans raised their voices in unison. Yes. Morgan felt a weight settle on his shoulders. He had not come to forge alliances, but now he realized there was no turning back. Humanity and the Cerilans were bound together. The Dauntless became a hub of learning. Engineers trained Cerilan villagers to repair machines and build stronger defenses. Scientists studied Sarilith's plants and minerals, discovering rare herbs with healing properties. Farmers learned new techniques to protect their crops. Slowly, a new spirit of cooperation formed. Lyra, the brave young Cerilan who had fought during the battle, became a symbol of this new spirit. She spent hours with the human officers, learning how to operate basic scanners and communication devices. She carried herself with pride, no longer just a villager, but a defender of her people. You fight with courage, Morgan told her one day. But your greatest strength is that you inspire others. Do not forget that. The Cerilans began to believe in their own worth. Where once they had lowered their heads in silence, they now looked to the stars with hope. Yet far away, trouble was gathering. The coalition of alien empires, humiliated by news of the raiders' defeat, saw humanity's actions as a challenge. To them, Sarilith was not just a small planet anymore. It was a spark that could ignite rebellion in other forgotten worlds. If humanity encouraged weaker civilizations to rise, the old balance of power would be shaken. In private chambers, leaders met. We cannot allow this alliance to grow, one declared. If humans see value in the worthless, soon every forgotten world will demand the same. This cannot stand. They prepared plans, not just to strike at Sarilith, but to test humanity's resolve. On Sarilith, Captain Morgan was not blind to the danger. Reports filtered through secret channels. Scouts observed unusual fleet movements near the sector. The humans had earned the trust of the Cerilans, but now they would need to prepare them for greater threats. Morgan stood before the villagers one morning, his expression serious. The battle we fought together was only the beginning. Others will come, stronger, more organized, more determined to crush us. But hear me clearly. We will not abandon you. The villagers listened, fear in their eyes, but also determination. Elder Saren stepped forward. We will not ask you to fight for us alone. We will fight beside you. Thus began the training of the Cerilans. The training was not easy. Cerilans had never held weapons before, nor had they practiced discipline. But the humans taught with patience. They did not turn the villagers into soldiers. They made them defenders. Simple energy bows were crafted. Alarms were built to detect incoming ships, and villagers learned how to form protective lines to shield one another. Children were taught to signal warnings, elders were shown how to secure supplies, and farmers learned how to turn their tools into weapons if needed. The Cerilans were no longer only victims. They were becoming guardians of their own land. Lyra excelled in her training. With sharp eyes and quick reflexes, she became a leader among the young defenders. Her courage spread to others, and soon, the villagers spoke of her as the Dawn Flame, a symbol of rising hope. Morgan watched with pride but also concern. He knew that courage alone would not be enough against the full strength of alien fleets, yet he also believed that what they were building here mattered more than any single battle. As weeks passed, new visitors arrived, not raiders but traders. Word had spread that humanity had opened Sarilith to friendship. A few small merchant ships came, curious and cautious. They offered goods in exchange for Cerealan herbs and crafts. It was a small beginning, but for the Cerelans, it was the first sign that they were no longer invisible. But not all who arrived came with goodwill. One evening, a sleek vessel appeared in orbit. Its colors marked it as belonging to a proud galactic empire. A message was broadcast across the surface. "Humans," the voice declared coldly. "Your presence here is unauthorized. Withdraw your protection from Sarilith at once. This planet does not belong to you, nor is it worthy of your defense." Morgan stood before the transmitter, his jaw set. He replied in steady tones. "Sarilith belongs to its people, not to you or anyone else. We are here as allies, not rulers. We will not abandon them." The alien envoy sneered. "Then you will face consequences." The message ended, leaving silence in the room. The crew exchanged uneasy looks, but Morgan only nodded. "So be it. Let them come. We will stand." That night, Elder Saren spoke with Morgan privately. His voice carried both gratitude and worry. "Captain, we never asked you to carry our burden. Why risk so much for us?" Morgan looked out at the starlit sky. "Because you deserve to live without fear, because no one else would, and because humanity believes that strength is not only in power, but in choosing to protect those who cannot fight alone." The elder placed a hand over his heart. "Then know this. Sarilith will remember humanity not as conquerors, but as family." As days turned into weeks, the alliance deepened. Humans and Cerelans worked as one, sharing skills, hopes, and burdens. The villagers who once saw themselves as forgotten now felt pride in their identity. They were no longer invisible. But in the distance, fleets were gathering, drawn by fear and jealousy. Empires prepared to strike, to crush this fragile alliance before it grew stronger. The Cerelans, once silent and ignored, now stood at the center of a storm. Yet for the first time, they faced the future not alone, but with humanity at their side. The alliance had been forged, and the galaxy would soon learn its strength. The days of peace on Sarilith were short. Though the villagers had rebuilt their homes and strengthened their courage, the galaxy was watching. Empires that once ignored this world now saw danger in what humanity had done. If the Cerelans, a people so small and powerless, could find strength because of human protection, then other forgotten worlds might rise too. That thought filled the mighty with fear. Across distant councils, rulers gathered. They spoke in cold voices, their pride wounded by reports of Sarilith's survival. "Humanity must be reminded of its limits," one declared. "If they defend one weak world, they will encourage others to resist our rule." Another nodded. "We must crush this before it spreads." Thus a coalition was formed. Fleets of several empires joined together, not out of friendship, but out of shared desire to end humanity's defiance. They planned to send a storm of warships to Sarilith, a show of force so overwhelming that resistance would seem impossible. On Sarilith, Captain Elias Morgan already suspected what was coming. Reports from human scouts and sympathetic traders painted a grim picture. A great fleet was gathering, larger than anything the Dauntless could withstand. In the council square, Morgan spoke openly to the Cerelans. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried the weight of truth. "Another storm is coming," he told them. "Not pirates this time, but empires. They do not come for resources or wealth. They come to break your spirit and to break ours." Fear rippled through the villagers. Some whispered of fleeing into the forests, hiding until the danger passed. But Elder Saren shook his head. "We have hidden all our lives, and still they came. If we run again, we will remain forever slaves to fear. No, Captain, we will stand with you." Morgan bowed his head in respect. "Then we will stand together." Preparations began. The Dauntless could not fight fleets head-on, but humanity's strength was never only in firepower. It was in creativity, in refusing to surrender, and in making the impossible possible. Engineers worked day and night, turning Seralith's forests and valleys into traps. Narrow canyons were lined with explosives that could be triggered when enemy ships entered. Rivers were diverted to create sudden floods that could wipe out ground troops. Farmers sharpened tools into weapons, while children prepared signal fires on the hills to guide allies. The Seralans trained harder than ever. Guided by human officers, they learned to form ranks, to guard each other's backs, and to use simple weapons with discipline. Lyra, the young villager who had once asked to be taught, now stood as a leader among them. She carried herself with calm determination, her presence encouraging others to be brave. "You do not need to be soldiers," Morgan told them. "You only need to be defenders. Fight for your homes, for your families, for each other. That is strength no empire can understand." The day of the trial arrived. The sky above Seralith darkened as the Coalition fleet emerged from hyperspace. Dozens of massive warships filled the heavens, their weapons glowing like fire. The ground shook as their engines roared. To the Seralans, it seemed as if the very stars had turned against them. A message came through the open channel, cold and merciless. "Humans, you defy the order of the galaxy. Withdraw at once, or be destroyed. Seralith will kneel, or Seralith will burn." Morgan stood in the command room of the Dauntless, his crew watching him in silence. He pressed the transmitter. His words were simple, but they carried power. "We do not abandon our friends. If you want Seralith, you must take it from us," the Coalition commander sneered. "Then prepare to be erased." The battle began. The first wave of enemy ships descended, firing on the villages. But instead of scattering, the Seralans and humans triggered their traps. Explosions erupted in the canyons, catching several warships off guard. Rivers burst their banks, sweeping enemy troops away. Smoke rose from hidden fires, blinding sensors and confusing attackers. The Dauntless darted through the skies, firing carefully placed shots. Though outnumbered, it struck weak points in enemy formations, forcing them to hesitate. Shuttles piloted by human volunteers lured larger ships into narrow valleys where they became easy targets. On the ground, Seralans stood shoulder to shoulder with their allies. Spears and bows might have seemed primitive against alien weapons, but courage filled the gaps. Lyra led her group with fierce resolve, shouting orders and keeping her people united. Every villager who once feared the stars now stood as a protector of their world. The Coalition, expecting an easy conquest, found themselves facing resistance fiercer than they imagined. Every trap, every counterattack, every display of human ingenuity slowed their advance. What they thought would take hours stretched into days. The battle raged without pause. The Dauntless shook under heavy fire, its shields flickering dangerously low. "Captain, we can't take much more," shouted Harris, his voice filled with strain. Morgan gritted his teeth. "Then we'll make what we have count. Redirect power to the forward cannons." The ship roared as its last reserves of energy blasted outward, striking a Coalition cruiser. The larger vessel broke apart in flames, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. Cheers erupted from the Seralans below, their hope renewed, but the cost was heavy. The Dauntless was nearly crippled, its systems failing. Morgan knew they could not hold forever. He turned to his crew, his voice quiet but firm. "If we fall standing. That is all that matters." On the ground, the Seralans fought with desperation. Tired, wounded, yet unyielding, they refused to abandon their homes. Lyra stood at the front lines, rallying those around her. "Hold fast, for Seralith, for our future." Even the Coalition soldiers, hardened by countless battles, began to falter. They had expected weakness, but what they saw was unity. Humans and Seralans, different species bound by loyalty, fought as one. The Coalition commanders grew frustrated. "This is madness," one snarled. "Why do they resist so fiercely? It is only a worthless world." But that was the very reason. They could not win. To the Cerealans, this world was not worthless, it was everything. To the humans, protecting it was not weakness but honor, and together that belief was stronger than fleets. After days of relentless struggle, the coalition finally broke. Their fleets, battered and demoralized, withdrew into the void. The skies cleared, leaving Serelith scarred but unbowed. The battlefield was silent except for the cries of relief. Villagers embraced one another, tears of exhaustion and triumph on their faces. Human crew members, battered and weary, stood among them. They had survived the trial. Morgan stepped out of the Dauntless, his uniform torn, his eyes heavy with fatigue. Elder Saren approached him, leaning on his staff. "You have faced the fire, Captain, and still you stand. You gave us more than protection. You gave us the will to rise." Morgan shook his head. "No, Elder. You gave yourselves that will. We only reminded you it was there." The villagers cheered, their voices echoing into the night. Serelith was no longer forgotten. It had endured the trial of fire and emerged stronger. Yet, far beyond the planet, the galaxy stirred uneasily. The coalition's failure shocked many. Whispers spread through the stars. Humans had stood against empires and prevailed. Weaker civilizations, long ignored and oppressed, began to wonder if they too could rise. For the first time, the powerful feared not the humans' weapons, but their spirit. The trial had ended, but its echo would spread across the galaxy. The battle was over, but the memory of it burned like fire in every Cerealan heart. Their world, once forgotten and ignored, had faced the storm of mighty empires and survived. The ruins of villages still smoked, the scars of battle stretched across fields and forests, yet Serelith stood unbroken. For the Cerealan, survival was more than victory, it was transformation. They were no longer invisible. They were no longer victims waiting for raids. They had fought beside humanity and discovered their strength. On the plains outside the village, a gathering was held. The humans of the Dauntless stood with the Cerealans, facing a crowd that filled the square. Elder Saren raised his staff, his voice steady despite his tired frame. "My people," he began, "for countless years we cried into the void, asking the galaxy to see us. No answer came. But then humanity came, not to rule, not to take, but to protect. And together, we stood against the fire. Today, we are no longer forgotten." The Cerealans cheered, their voices rising as one. For the first time in their history, hope outweighed fear. Captain Elias Morgan stood among his crew, silent as the voices echoed around him. He felt pride, but also the weight of what was to come. The coalition might have been defeated, but humanity's defiance would not be ignored. More eyes now turned towards Serelith, and not all of them were friendly. That evening, Morgan walked with Elder Saren through the village streets. Children played, their laughter filling the air. Farmers, though weary, replanted fields. The wounds of battle were many, but the spirit of the people was alive. Saren spoke quietly. "Captain, you must know what your actions have done. You have changed not only us, but the galaxy. Already, other small worlds will hear of this. They will ask, if Serelith can stand, why not us?" Morgan nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is what frightens the empires most. Not our weapons, not our ships, but the idea that no world is too small to matter." In the weeks that followed, Serelith became a symbol. Traders arrived with new respect, offering fair exchanges instead of exploitation. Messengers from other minor civilizations sent secret words of gratitude, asking for news of humanity's strength. And then, something unthinkable happened. For the first time in galactic history, a message was sent not to the great empires, not to the powerful councils, but directly to Serelith. It came from a small coalition of other ignored worlds, planets dismissed as weak, preyed upon by raiders, forgotten by the mighty. The message was simple. If you can be seen, perhaps we can too. Let us stand together. Humanity responded with open hands. Representatives from Earth arrived, not in warships but in ships of peace. They met with the Cerealans and their new allies in the great valley of Serelith. There, beneath the light of the three moons, an agreement was signed. The Cerealans would join humanity in alliance, not as subjects but as equals. Other small civilizations followed, forming a council of the overlooked, those who had been ignored, now determined to speak with one voice. When the news reached the great empires, their reaction was fierce. Many condemned humanity, calling them dangerous. But others, even among the mighty, began to question the old order. If humanity could inspire loyalty where wealth and power had failed, perhaps strength was not only measured in fleets. On Serelith, life changed forever. Where once villagers only dreamed of surviving, they now dreamed of building. Schools were created where humans and Cerealans studied side by side. Farms grew with new techniques. Children learned not only the stories of their ancestors, but also the lessons of courage shared by their human allies. Lyra, once the young villager who asked to be taught, became a leader among her people. She was chosen to represent Serelith at the new council. Her voice carried not the fear of one who begged, but the confidence of one who knew her people's worth. When she first stood before the gathering, her words were simple. We were ignored, but humanity chose to see us. Because of that, we now see ourselves, and we will never be silent again. Captain Morgan watched these changes with quiet pride. The Dauntless, though scarred, remained in orbit as a guardian, but Morgan knew the Cerealans no longer needed protection in the same way. They had found their own voice. One night, as the village celebrated a harvest, Saren approached Morgan once more. His eyes were bright, filled with gratitude. Captain, he said softly, long after you and I are gone, our children will remember. They will remember the day humanity came. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as friends who stood when no one else would. That is the day we became seen. Morgan smiled faintly. Then that is enough for me. The galaxy could not ignore Serelith any longer. From the richest trade worlds to the oldest empires, all now knew the name of a planet once considered worthless. And with that name came a lesson. Strength is not only in power. Strength is in choosing to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Strength is in compassion that refuses to yield. Humanity had taught the Cerealans this truth, but in return, the Cerealans had given humanity something too, the reminder that even the smallest voice can change the stars. Years later, when historians told the story, they called it the day they were seen. They spoke of how one small world became a symbol of dignity for all forgotten peoples. They told how humanity, against all odds, stood by those who had nothing to give but trust. And for the Cerealans, that day became a new beginning. No longer ignored, no longer invisible, they looked up at the stars and knew the truth. They were not alone. They never would be again.